Alrighty, everybody, it's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. It's your host, the publisher of Skeptic magazine. Just to remind you, this is what my day job is. We are still in print, unlike a lot of magazines. You can actually go to a bookstore, and there it is on the stand, usually next to Scientific American, National Geographic, sometimes next in the New Age section, which is always amusing. And we are 4-color throughout now, so it's a really cool,
very cool,
beautiful issue. Yeah, and look at our new cover on economic matters. It's the economy monster trying to be tamed by the Wall Street trader or whoever that guy is, with some homeless people in the background. And just ignore that part back there. Anyway, you can subscribe by going to skeptic.com and just click on the magazine, the latest issue, or any of the back issues going back 30 years to 1992. And or you can just pick it up at a bookstore. And
so you guys started in 92. That was almost the same time Wired started. So 30 years.
Yeah. Well, we never got as big as Wired. Wired is huge, as you know. Well, you were there. You were there at the founding. Right? It's a tough business, without...
Wired's still on paper. So 30, let's hear it to 30 years on paper.
Yes, that's right. And physical books, right? Okay, I got to give you a proper introduction here, Kevin. This is my book, The Moral Arc, chapter 12, called Protopian.
Yeah.
The Protopia, the Future of Moral Progress. Where did I get this word? Here we go. So I open this chapter talking about utopias, and then I say a better descriptor than utopia for what we ought to strive for is protopia, a place where progress is steadfast and measured. The visionary futurist Kevin Kelly described it this way, quote, "I call myself a protopian, not a utopian. I believe in progress in an incremental way, in a way where there's every year it's better than it was the year before, but not by much, just a micro amount." And then I say, instead of the 1950s imagined jump from the jalopy to the flying car, think of the decades-long cumulative improvements that led to today's smart cars with their onboard computers and nav systems, airbags, composite metal frames and bodies, satellite radios, hand-free phones, electric hybrid engines. Instead of a great leap forward, think small step upward.
Yes, very creeping towards betterment is how I call it.
Oh, yeah, that's nicely put. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, you have done that properly. Let me give you the proper introduction here. He helped launch and edit Wired magazine. He's written for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, among other publications. Previous books include What Technology Wants and The Inevitable, a New York Times bestseller. He's known for his technological optimism, and he is currently the Senior Maverick, that's a title, at Wired magazine. He lives in Pacifica, California. I don't think of you as an optimist so much as a realist.
Well, that's what I would say. I would say if you are a realist, you have to be an optimist, because one of the most weirdest denials going on is the denial of progress. Progress is real. And if you look at the actual data, the actual evidence, you have to acknowledge that there's progress. So a realist would be progress. And if you have progress, you're going to be optimist because it's statistically probable that it'll continue.
People seem to have a hard time in a kind of a Bayesian reasoning in a Bayesian way, that there can still be problems and there's progress.
Right. The way I put it is like, I'm an optimist, not because I think we don't have as many problems as we thought we do. It's because I believe our capacity to solve them is bigger and increasing faster.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything inevitable about it, or is it just something we have to act?
I don't think I don't think the, what should I say? I think there's ups and downs. And first of all, we're talking about global averages, and in certain regionals, there's going to be plenty wrong. So it's like the health of a person. Is it inevitable that you'll be healthy? No. And you'll always have some ailment somewhere in your body. And even if you are relatively healthy, there'll be parts of you that aren't. That's sort of the norm. And I think our society or civilization is not inevitable that we continue, but it's statistically probable that if you've done it for 200 years, it will do that again next year.
Right. Yeah. Pinker gets pushback on this, that you're saying it's inevitable. No, he says like 1,000 times. It's not inevitable. We have to actually do it.
Right. We can choose. And here's the other thing I say about my book about technologies. I think technologies are inevitable in their sequencing. It's not. So and it's not their character. So we're going to have AI no matter what, as long as we keep making things. But we have a choice about the character of the AI. Who owns them? Who runs them? Are they commercial, non-commercial? Are they open source or not? International or national? those are choices that we have about the AIs. And so they make a huge difference to us. Those choices are immensely important to us, but we don't have a choice about AIs coming or not. They're on their way.
Right. You want to comment on ChatGPT and all the hoopla
Oh,
about
sure.
that?
I've been talking about it
I
nonstop
know.
and using it nonstop. I make a piece of AI generated art, which I post every day. I was using ChatGPT 4 last night. Um, the generative AIs. First of all, I always insist that we talk about AIs in plural. There's not the AI in general. It's like machines. If we talk about machines, we don't talk about the machine. And these current generative AIs are what I would call UPIs. They're universal personal interns. Everybody now has an
Interesting.
intern.
Yeah.
You now have a navigator sitting with you as you drive around. You have a librarian helping you search for things. And now we all have interns. And you work with the interns, they'll do all kinds of amazing things, but it's embarrassing to release the intern's work without checking it.
Right. I just gave my students their midterm. It's an essay that they do on their own
Right?
based on the readings. Am I going to get a bunch of GPT generated essays back? And how could I tell?
Well, so you can tell. Well, first of all, yeah, you probably will, and you can tell, but you'll be able to tell if it's really unadulterated, if it's intern work. The thing about the chats and the generatives is they work on the wisdom of the crowd type of knowledge. The wisdom of the crowd was the one that counted the jelly beans. So the county fair would have a big jar of jelly beans, and you'd have to decide, count how many were in there, and if you were right, you won a prize. And it turned out that if you average all the people's guesses, that was the closest to the actual number, the wisdom of the crowd, because it was kind of like the average. Well, the chat's been trained on the average of human generation, the best of it and the worst of it, everything. So you get this average view. And generally, it's very, very bland, middle of the road average, which oftentimes is the correct thing, right? But it's not always. And so one of the characteristics about the generative stuff is that it can be fairly average in that sense. And that's fairly bland. And you actually have to push it to make it different than that. And I think you can apply AIs to actually in these chats to determine whether it was something that was written by them or not. And we'll do more of that. But I liked one high school's solution to this was they actually had the kids gather together and devise the rules themselves for what they wanted.
Nice.
And I thought that was a very clever way. Okay, you guys come up with something you have a consensus on as to how you want this to be treated. And I thought that was a very sophisticated and elevated and enlightened way to have them buy into the whole thing rather than kind of like something that they are trying to hack around.
Yeah. One of the books I use for my class is Pinker's new rationality book.
Sure.
And so one of the questions is like, on the discussion of Bayesian reasoning, please explain Bayesian's formula and what examples Pinker uses. I suppose if ChatGPT has access to Pinker's scanned book, it could produce a pretty coherent essay.
Well, try it. You'll be shocked. Have it say, right. Give me the argument for Bayesian in the style of Steven Pinker, and you'll be floored because it'll do exactly that. But it does it in a way that's still middle of the road. And most kids and most people tend to have little idiosyncrasies that aren't going to show up. So, So these are tools, and they're going to be built in. They're already built into Slack. They're built into Salesforce. They're being built into Google Sheets. They're being built into everything, and they're just going to become. It's like we expect to find search everywhere, right? On our phone, we want search, and it's everywhere now. And this UPIs, these universal personal assistants, are going to be everywhere.
Did I read it could pass the bar?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But it can't do other stuff. And so I think one of the stances we're going to have going forward is this frustration, what I call dumb smarten. Dumb smarten is when you're saying, how could you be so smart in this and so dumb over here? Right?
That's
And
really
that's
funny.
going to be the typical response to these. It's like, you're incredibly brilliant, but you're so stupid over here. How is that possible? Well, it's possible because these are artificial aliens. They are not human. They don't think like humans. And the fact that they don't think like humans is actually the feature. It's the benefit, is because it helps us think differently. You're going to work with them. Your intern is not going to think exactly like you. So there's two of you, and you're going to be a partner, and together you're going to make stuff.
That's a great term. Dumb smarten reminds me of Steve Allen had a term called dump. He actually wrote a book called Dump, just filled with examples of just smart people saying dumb things.
Yeah.
You know? And one of them was, the opening one was, he was at a hotel and he called down to the room service to ask what the soup du jour was. And the lady goes, just a minute, I'll find out. She comes back. It means soup of the day. Okay. Thank you for the translation. Now, what is the soup of the day? Right? That's funny. Now, so here's what I told my students. So look, even if you could do this, let's say you can, it writes all your essays. Why would you want to? Why are you even bothered to be in college? What's the point?
Right.
I mean, I could ask GPT, write Michael Shermer's next book in his style. On this subject. Right. And then I could just go ride my bike.
Exactly. Right.
But so why would I want to do that? I like writing my book.
Exactly. So, and that's what the high school students were deciding is, what's the purpose of all this anyway. So you could, and the question is, if GPT can write good summary and stuff, what are we going to write that's better than that? And the answer is, there's lots of things and lots of ways we can be better. And I think what we'll see is people's writings getting better because they'll do some of the basic work. And also, by the way, the way I use it is, for me, that first draft is just a killer. It's just a killer. What I'm finding my personal assistant useful for is drafting up kind of like a rough draft. I don't use any of it, but just gets me going in the right direction. It's got the bullet points if I ask for it, or a summary or something. And it's kind of like, you remember that old chestnut that the best way to get a right answer on the internet is to post the wrong answer and have somebody correct it? Like if you ask, what's the capital of Ohio? No one's ever going to ask. But if you say the capital of Ohio is Cincinnati, then people are going to chime in and correct you. I think that's correct. It's Cleveland. I don't know. Anyway, so the point is that people are much more likely to correct things, and so we can use it in that way of getting it as a start. And I find it easier to kind of like work with my interns, rough draft, and get going, and it really helps us write.
When you say intern, you mean an actual person, or are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about the UPI. I'm talking about chat. It's my intern. I'm telling you,
Right.
Everybody's using it this way. They've done a study already where they showed that writers are 37% faster using these generative. Programmers love them. My son's a programmer. They're using them all the time. They have to check the work. You have to check the intern. It's an intern. You can't release it. You have to work with them. And there was a moment, you probably remember this, maybe in the 80s, when there's this huge lamentation and hand-wringing about the fact that writing was dead. Reading and writing was dead. Nobody was going to write anymore. Well, it's been the complete opposite. Any one of my kids have written millions of words more than any of their grandparents ever wrote. People write all the time, and we're better writers. We're better writers. And this is the other thing, is the writing is better because they did some scoring of people writing like a general essay versus writing online. When you're writing online, you're trying to communicate something to a specific person. You actually communicate better than if you're kind of like trying to write a high school essay for your high school class. You're kind of just making up words there. So I think that these tools are going to help us write even better than before.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it was the same concerns with the printing press or even the book itself.
Sure.
The ability to remember things through these memory systems is going to fade with books, something like that. Well, good riddance. I like my books. Yeah, but and also aren't there studies showing like television scripts and movie scripts are much higher level now, more complex, more elements
Yes,
than they were
absolutely.
in, so, I mean, the Drek in the 60s, when you look at some of these shows, they're just
Right. I
awful.
mean, people lament again the short attention span, but look at like Lost or 5 seasons of
Right.
one single narrative and all the complexities, and there's far more complex. And so both ends are being driven, where we have an exploration of how fast and short things can be, and at the same time we're going long form, longer and longer. There might be eventually a 10-year 2,000 episode narrative story. That's entirely possible. In
I
some
think it
ways,
was in,
Star Wars is sort
yeah,
of that.
yeah. I think it was in your previous book where you talked about the threat of somebody like a terrorist organization getting a
Mhm.
hold of one of these technologies, and that. But your argument was the more complex the system is, the less likely a terrorist could, because there's so many steps in between where somebody could intervene.
Right. And I did my look at the past was, has the number of people that a single person is able to kill by themselves increased? And it really hasn't. In terms of like, let's look at whatever murders or killing that has been done so far, not what could be, but actually what has been. And one person, lighting a fire to a house or something might kill 30 people. There's a shotgun guy killing, but it actually has not been increasing. It has not, I should say, it has
Right.
not
Right.
increased over time. And that's partly because these new technologies, they could kill a lot of people, but it requires more people involved into making them
Mhm.
work. The Hollywood trope I just get um, kind of um, unbelievably annoyed at is the villain up on the layer on the mountaintop with a cave full of equipment that all works the first time.
Dr. Evil.
Let alone, it's like most of us can't keep two computers going without IT support, and they've got all this stuff that's working and it's never been used before, and it works the first time, and it's like that is just no. There's really thousands of people behind the scenes keeping that going.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, so a colleague of mine here, a friend Dan O'Dowd in Santa Barbara, runs this Green Hills software company, and he's been taking ads out against Elon and the whole self-driving technology. He thinks it's a threat. I mean, like it's a massive threat. Like somebody could. I have a Tesla. Shermer, somebody's going to take over your Tesla and drive it into the wall. Okay, how come this hasn't happened already? Well, it's going. They're waiting. A terrorist could like turn 1,000 Teslas at the same time on the 405 freeway and slam them into the wall. Massive terrorist attack. Thousands of people will die in one event. Well, okay. Should I
Yeah.
be worried?
Yeah. No, as you said, I think there is something with that. A smart anything means a hackable thing. So, smart door is a hackable door. Smart car is a hackable car. Smartphone is a hackable. Yes. Um, the thing about it is that what we've learned is this complex technology is to take a biological view. So you can never eradicate the harm or the viruses. You can just keep them to a minimum. Okay. So yes, these Teslas, by the nature that they're smart, are going to be hackable. So what we want to do is keep the hacking to a minimum, and we have all kinds of ways of doing it. And there's a huge industry and incentive to keep it to a minimum, right? And so like before, and now here's something else I would say: most technological things happen; they don't happen without intermediates. They don't happen all of a sudden. They usually happen something up leading up to them. So before a terrorist decides to take over all the Teslas, I think you'd see a smaller version test run somewhere. And if that starts to happen, okay, then you can get worried. But it's
Hmm.
not going to happen the first time. It won't work. It's actually very hard technically to do. And that's what I'm saying. It's this idea that would require an incredible amount of cooperation and collaboration to get that to work on the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, and airplanes are online. Why aren't planes falling out of the sky from terrorists
Yeah,
hacking them? Well,
sure.
maybe it's just much harder. Maybe the terrorists are not the brightest bulbs in the door, right? I
Right.
mean, the shoe,
I
the
mean,
shoe.
the terrorists discovered that rather than try and take over the orientation navigation system, you just hijack it with. That's a much
people.
That was the brilliant way. Yeah, that's a much more direct and reliable way.
Dawkins wrote a great essay after 9/11 in which he kind of invoked Skinner's experiments in the 50s in which he trained pigeons to peck keys and then set up this device where the pigeon would guide the missile.
Right.
But you have a compass and a gyroscope or whatever, and the pigeon's looking at this cross, and it's got to keep it. So it goes off this way, and it pecks the right key, pecks the left key, or whatever. And this never really worked out. But Dawkins said, but somebody figured out something even better than that. You can do something like that with people, but you got to convince them that they're going to go to the next life if they do this. And then he goes off on the terrorists and so on. But yeah, that's right. Much cheaper. Evolution's already designed that AI system.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. And we can make one in 9 months without any kind of trained labor.
Right. It's right. Yeah, it just happens.
Yeah.
And you get to have fun making it too.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. What about, while we're on it, then we'll get to your book. AI is an existential threat. People like Stuart Russell or maybe Nick Bostrom, Sam Harris. Nick Bostrom's with his paperclip. He's going to turn us all into paper. Why can't we just unplug it? Whatever. You can't because of alignment problems. What are your thoughts on all that?
It's way, way overrated. It's religious almost, in this kind of cult of the superhuman AI that's going to solve all our problems. It sounds like God. There's a bunch of different problems with it. The most fundamental one is I think a misunderstanding of what intelligence is, because we don't know what it is. All we do know is that multidimensional. It's not like decibels where you can kind of just go up the ladder and you have something like us, and then there's after us the geniuses. But these AIs, again, the plural, are many different varieties, and there is a engineering maxim that you cannot optimize everything in all directions. So you have to have trade-offs, and so this goes back to Dumb Smart, and there will be various kinds of AIs that will exceed us in certain dimensions, and others that won't, and they're different. And so we could say, well, what is this? The very idea of general intelligence is so incorrect. Our intelligence, if we plot it in the space of all possible minds and all possible intelligences in the galaxy, we're going to be like off to the edge, just like we are in the galaxy. We're going to be not in the center of anything. Our type of intelligence is way off in the corner. It's very, very specific for evolution on this planet. And that this idea that there's general intelligence is only because we've eliminated all the other kinds of sentience on this planet. We don't know why. I think we might discover that we're very peculiar, that we don't have other intelligences, natural intelligence around us. And so we have this idea that ours is the general purpose variety or the Uber kind. What we're going to do is we're going to make all these artificial aliens to surround us with millions or thousands or hundreds of other kinds of thinking and minds. And as we do that, we'll begin to have a better picture of all the possibility space and the fact that our intelligence is not at the center of it at all. It's at the edge.
So you mean that the whole existential threat of AI is a misconceived problem? Or
Yes.
The problem with the concept itself?
It's of intelligence, what it actually is. Intelligences are complexes of different kinds of cognition, and the idea that the one is the idea is that it's a misrepresentation of even evolution. The wrong impression of evolution that it's a ladder, that there's this sort of this one is superior to this one. That idea of superiorness, that's not scientific. The proper view of evolution is a circle where there's the original radiating the earliest ancestral cell and everything radiates outward. So anything alive today is equally evolved.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the cockroaches are as highly evolved as we are. They've endured the same amount of evolution at the same spot. So it's not a ladder going up. And so we have all these organisms, and you could say, like, is the whale superior? Is that a superior organism to the dog? Okay, well, superior in what dimension? There's multiple dimensions here. The idea that the AI is superior to human. Well, in what dimensions? All dimensions. You can't have that. That's an engineering impossibility. You cannot maximize all dimensions. If you're going to have one that can run fast, it's like we can say we want to make the ultimate machine, the machine better than human. What would that look like? What would a machine better than human? One that could jump higher than us? If it can jump higher, it probably can't bend lower. It probably can't be more nimble. It can't hide as easily. Whatever it is, you can't make the kind of machine that's better than all machines. That's just conceptually, there's something wrong about this metric of intelligence as a ladder going up. It's just not there.
Almost like asking, is the machine an existential threat? What machine? Which
exactly? or machines. We're going to talk about the machines. I like machines. So the other thing too, in terms of one of the fears, is that these machines can run an exponential growth. That they can exponentially create a machine smarter than them, again, measured on what axis, which we have none of those axes. And then that machine will make one smarter than itself. And that when it does that even at a faster pace. So all of a sudden, you have this exponential rocket off. Well, here's the thing. Right now, we have no evidence of exponential growth in artificial intelligence at all. Zero. We have the opposite. We have exponential growth in the amount of input required to make a little tiny gain. Okay, so what's growing exponentially is the amount of resources that we're devoting to it to produce a little bit of a gain. And again, what's that gain being measured on? What is the measurement? We don't know. I could translate words faster. Is that intelligence? They may not be. So there is no exponential output, exponential rise in IQ or intelligence or whatever it is. So far, we have no evidence of it. That's in the future, maybe in the future, but so far, it is not expanding exponentially.
Even the famous Flynn effect is apparently starting to flatten out.
Right.
Now, IQ scores going up 3 points every 10 years for almost a century.
Right.
Probably the result of just the shift from industry to information processing. And the students taking these tests, or young adults taking these IQ tests, are just better at manipulating symbols.
Sure.
So on. But the idea behind general intelligence, G, is that, if you score really high on that one portion of the IQ test, you can rotate a cube or one of these objects in space and tell me which one below is the accurate one if you've rotated it 3 times. Whatever. You're also going to be better at mathematical reasoning and logic and interpreting some narrative that you have to in the verbal part of the IQ. Something.
Right.
I think that's the idea of G.
Right. And so nobody has applied G to the chats that I know of. If they had a G score, that would be interesting. That would be something. That would be some data that we could start to work with. And the hypothesis, according to the G people, would be if you had a chat bot that scored high on G, it would be successful in all these other things. And what we're going to show is that that's probably not true. So there's something about humans in particular and their intelligence that's different from the general intelligence that we're talking about.
And pretty much all other organisms too. There's something about our symbolic reasoning.
Right.
Alfred Russel Wallace struggled with this, right, and came up with this. Well, there must have been some kind of higher intelligence.
Right.
Put this in there. Why would evolution create a brain that you don't need a brain that big?
Right. Exactly. Right. Well, that's what we're discovering. We're discovering all kinds of things that we thought were very sophisticated turn out to be very mechanical, like playing chess.
Right.
Or now painting a picture. Creativity is actually a very mechanical thing. It's not this highly supernatural thing. It's a mechanical process that you can put into dumb things. And so yes, so we're seeing a kind of shifting. It's not that these things are really, really super smart. It's just that the tasks that we do as humans have been particularly not very smart in themselves.
Do you know Dean Keith Simonton's theory of genius?
No, what's that?
It's a Darwinian process where, if you look at the history of actually super creative, very successful people, they crank out just a shitload of work. I mean, just tons and tons of work before you ever heard of them. right? If you look at their
Yeah, yeah,
oeuvre
yeah.
from the, and it's like, and then there's a Darwinian selection. They're doing the selecting, or their immediate circle. Ultimately, the market, the public decides we like those and not those, and so they just refine it. And like Mozart, was raised with a musician father, and so on. And almost all of them are like that. And Matt Ridley makes this point in his book on innovation. There's no invention you're ever going to find anywhere ever that didn't have precursors to it.
Oh, not only precursors, simultaneous independent invention is the norm.
Right.
So yeah, all ideas are network ideas, and the next one will come at the same time to many people because that is the norm of how things go. 100%, and that's true for small things as well as big things or big findings. Even relativity was just a few years behind Einstein. There was a couple of people who were very close and would have discovered it as well.
Right. Or the Google boys had they been born 10 years later, they wouldn't have been the search engine guys.
Totally, total luck. The people that all the people who are very successful and rich that I admire most are those who acknowledge the role of luck that played in their lives.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, another point on that, Steve Gould spent most of his career trying to point out it's not directional. It's a richly branching bush, not a ladder. And you still see that language kind of creeping in, like Lucy. If you look at Lucy's ball and socket joint of her hip, she's on her way to becoming bipedal. She's not on her way to becoming anything. She's just Lucy, right? 3.5 million years old, doing just perfectly adapted for exactly that kind of lifestyle. But we can't help but look back and go, oh, look, that molar is almost human. It's not an almost human molar. It's a Neanderthal molar or whatever. It's just designed for what it does.
Mm-hmm.
That bias is hard to get past. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So excellent advice for living. I love this book. I've been reading this book for the last several weeks. It's in the smallest room in my house. Let me just say that. So I read a few pages every day. Here's the description. On his 68th birthday, Kevin Kelly began to write down for his young adult children some things he had learned about life that he wished he had known earlier. To his surprise, Kelly had more to say than he thought and kept adding the advice over the years, compiling a life's wisdom into these pages. Yeah, so you're slightly older than me. You must be early 70s by now because you've got a lot of advice in here. So what's going on here? Are you cramming for the final exam? Is this getting ready for the judgment day?
I love that, cramming for the final day. Yeah, Well, this is my second to the last piece of advice, which is your goal for your life is to be able to say on the day before you die that you have fully become yourself. So yes, I am cramming to become fully myself. And nice. This is part of it. Maybe things that I can pass on to others, like my kids and others beyond them, anybody who's young or young at heart. These are actual things I wish I'd known earlier. And I've distilled these sometimes books of wisdom into a little sentence as a way for me to remind myself and say them to myself as to change my habits, my behavior. And they, once reduced into that little capsule, they can be transmitted pretty easily. So the purpose is to remind ourselves of some of these bits, much of which is timeless and evergreen and ancient, some of it which is new, all of it which I put in my own words. But the idea is, there was someone else who said, it's not in the book, it's a great quote. It said, everything has already been said, but nobody was listening, so we need to say it again.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the kind of self-help movement. We did a article in Skeptic on by this author. He wrote a book called Sham, Self-Help and Actualization Movement. So he worked for Rodeo Press, who produced a lot of these self-help books. He said the number one predictor of who would buy one of these is people who already bought self-help books.
Yeah.
Well, if it works, why do you have to keep buying new ones,
sure.
Right? And the answer seems to be, well, it works now, today, but tomorrow's a different day, and you got to remind yourself, have this little inspirational quote, or this, kind of nudge yourself because it starts over. Entropy keeps grinding away.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, you have to be reminded, and that's part of making a habit is making that part of the process. So reminding ourselves is part of this process, and it's much easier to to form a habit of reminding than to have to kind of rediscover it, right? So the whole point of taking advice is that you want to leverage other people's mistakes in their lives and the wisdom that they have, and so you don't have to repeat them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've had quite a few authors on the show recently with books on happiness, purposefulness, awe, wonder, meaning. Almost everything in your book is like encapsulated in that, but you didn't study those subjects to write this book. So yeah, there is kind of a timelessness to it, and it's interesting that cognitive psychologists and philosophers, whoever, are kind of rediscovering these. Turns out, just money alone is not enough, or happiness by itself is not enough. You have to have purpose and meaning. Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So these are ancient, eternal truths in some ways. I've just been able to work at trying to reduce them to a tweet.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. Yes, right. Okay, let's just go through. I just dog-eared a bunch of pages of ones I liked, and you can just riff on them. Learn how to learn from those you disagree with or even offend you. See if you can find the truth in what they believe. Oh boy, Twitter could use some of that. It's just Twitter's the opposite of that. In fact, most social
right. It is. However, one thing I want to remind people is if you want a real education, read history. And like at almost any other time in history, the polarization, the misinformation that's going on right now would pale to compare what was going on then. I mean, it was like, well, I mean, we had such polarization in our own country that we decided to try and kill each other. It was called the Civil War.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's bad, but it's actually better than it was.
I agree, because I'm old enough to remember the late 60s, early 70s, and I was in college during Watergate, and 68, the assassinations. It was, the country was being torn apart.
Exactly.
And people are today going, oh, it's never been this bad. It's like, read about 68 to 72, Watergate, all that, Vietnam War.
Or go further back, and the craziness. We had a vice president who shot his political opponent, murdered him. It's like, come on.
Right. That's right. You're talking about Aaron Burr and
yeah.
Like, right, dueling. Right, that was a thing.
Yeah, but still, it was like, and then they go on. It's like nothing. It's like that's the norm.
Right. But on that, since we're talking about AI, these social media platforms are designed to accelerate anger, right, and to keep people on longer.
I can't say that they're designed to accelerate. They do actually amplify outrage. I don't think they're designed for that. And I think that is a cost that we are having to wrestle with, which is we get other benefits from that. It does amplify outrage. So what do we do about it? Are we willing to pay that cost or not? And if not, can we minimize that cost? And one of the things I want to stress about social media is that it's still an infant. I mean, it's just in grade school. I mean, it's still the baby in terms of figuring out what is good for and what is not. And we still don't have enough data. I think these systems are as complex as our own bodies. They're like, and that just as we, and you, I'm hoping Skeptic back this, you don't want to base your policy on one medical study, right? And we've done one or two studies on social media in the US only. It's like, no. It's going to take 100 of these studies before we really, really have a sense of what's going on because of the number of variables, and so mostly what we're legislating and making policies is based on what we could imagine happening, and that's that third person worry. Third person, it's like AI unemployment. It's like everybody's worried about somebody they could imagine being fired, but they're not worried about their own jobs. That's that third person worry.
Yeah.
That's not a good way to make policy.
No, that's a good point, right? We don't have that much data on this. Reminds me of the replication crisis in psychology in particular, and medicine in general. So many of these findings are based on one study. You know, if you're standing at the top of an escalator, people give more money than at the bottom of the escalator, or the power pose, or, any of those. And then no one could replicate them. And then there was all these books and studies, stories about it. And then nothing. Right. So, now we're in the grips of this debate about social media. Why is there this spike in teenage depression, anxiety,
and extremism? And they're based on very flimsy data, in my opinion. I mean, they're a good start.
Yeah.
You can't discount the entire win, but you have to do more to compensate for what you don't know.
When you forgive others, they may not notice, but you will heal. Forgiveness is not something we do for others, it's a gift to ourselves. But the person has to actually be sorry, right?
No,
that they hurt you. No?
that's what's. I have another one. It may not be in this version, but forgiveness is accepting the apology that you're not going to get.
Really?
Yes.
But I don't want to accept. I want to be pissed off.
You want to
Kill
carry it
this
around? That's fine. But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
for your own healing and your own release, is you accept the apology you're not going to get.
Mm. Sort of a stoic philosophy, right?
I don't
Or
know. I have no idea.
well, it's it's like the serenity prayer, right? Grant me the ability to change the things I can and ignore the ones I
Right, right,
can't.
right.
Wisdom to know the difference.
No, you don't wait for them to say they're sorry. You release, and that you're not releasing them.
Mm.
You're releasing you.
Right. Because you have no control over them,
You have no
but you
control
do
over
over your
them,
mind.
and if they're having influence over you, it's like, okay, you're not going to have any influence over me anymore. I'm not going to just wait for you. You're going to make me wait. I'm gone. I'm released you and releasing me from that obligation.
Mm. That'd be the difference between being an actual victim of some crime versus living as a victim the rest of your life, victimhood status, something like that.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I didn't thought about that.
Yeah. Well, because in well, anyway, social media, there's a lot of people claiming victimhood. Why would you want that? Anyway, okay, you can't reason someone out of a notion they didn't reason themselves into. Really, I
Yeah.
I I, I get letters from people saying, "Hey, you reasoned me out of my crazy beliefs."
Well, they probably were reasoned into it then.
Oh, okay,
What I'm
okay.
saying is that most people believe are not things that they reasoned themselves into. They're things that they
Mm,
inherited for emotional reasons. So yeah, sure. If they reason themselves into it, they can be reasoned out of. But that's not how most people arrive at what their beliefs are.
yeah, that's true, right? Religious beliefs, political tribalism.
Right.
People don't really know the exact details of their party's various planks in the platform. They just go, well, I'm a Republican. I'm a
Right.
Democrat.
Right.
This is what I believe.
One of the things I tell people is everybody in the Western world, particularly, should read the Bible through from beginning to end at least once in
Mm,
their lives. And I'm always shocked by the number of people who are very ardent Christians who haven't read it through. It's like,
mm.
okay, where did you get all this stuff from? Yeah, it's and by the way, I think that's another reason is that because people didn't reason in that arguing is about it is not that effective as a way to change people's minds.
Mm. Right, because they hold the belief for some other reason. So
Exactly.
a creationist probably doesn't know much about a theory of evolution.
Right.
Actually, most people that tell pollsters they accept the theory of evolution, when you ask them how does it work, they
They
give
don't
some
know either.
Lamarckian explanation. They don't really know.
Right.
So
Right.
in a way, they're saying I accept science. Most scientists tell me
Yeah.
this is true. I accept the science.
Well, that's the weird thing, which there's a lot kind of a culture in Silicon Valley for um, being contrary against the kind of what everybody knows, what everybody believes. Well, the truth is that what everybody knows is right most of the time. Most of what we know is what everybody knows, and most of what I know is what everybody knows, and it's 95% of everything I know or more. And so, conventional wisdom is usually correct, and that's what we have in common is that we all accept the capital of England is London, whatever. Okay, everybody knows that. That's correct. Um, so that commonality, I think, is something we shouldn't forget, and that's where we get most of our information is from outside. I have I believe in atoms,
But
and
you never
it's
seen one.
I haven't yet to see one, but I take their word for it. There are Greek proofs, Demosthenes and others who proved atoms, but they still didn't see them. So there's lots of things like the speed of light, which I'm pretty certain about, but because
Right,
because because people that I trust have told me that,
right.
and it kind of fits into things. But yeah,
Well, so there we have confidence in the method of science
Right.
as a competitive enterprise, and
Yep.
that when Michelson and Morley first ran their experiments, of course, it's a peer-reviewed journal article,
Right. Right.
other people try to replicate it, and they did. And therefore, so it grows in a kind of confidence. By the time it gets to the textbook and we
Yeah.
read it, it's like, okay, well, I guess this must be true because all
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
people, they would have
But
said something by now.
but I think we're actually going to come up to something, and you'll enjoy this because this is definitely in your bailiwick. I think that the new chat bots are going to initiate a tremendous um, leap or movement in our epistemological apparatus of understanding. So it's one of the things that these bots do is they give you answers. And so far, the answers have not been 100% reliable, right? So, including they've been apparently very bad at math, where like unlike Google or something, you can give it a math problem, a large multiplication problem, and it'll get it like a calculator. But the chat tends to kind of make up numbers.
Right.
All right, or people have had degrees. People make up degrees or projects they've worked on that just don't exist. That sound very plausible, and so the question is going to be like, how do we come to trust something? How do we know something's true? So what would the chat have to do to persuade you to trust it? Right. So does it? So one of the first ideas is, well, it show sources. It should bring forth the sources of where it's getting its information. But that's actually not always possible because, like, I could say something now and you'd say, "Can you source that?" And I was like, "Well, actually, I don't know where I learned that. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's been so long. It's so in the comments." Um, but then the question, of course, is, well, is that source reliable? Why? And so, like, well, maybe there's a footnote to that source too. And the question is, like, well, how many sources down would you need yourself before you decide that that's true? And is there any number that's, you know, what is that number? And then is there something like PageRank with search? Is there kind of weightings on these different weightings? And is that important to us in terms of determining whether something is believable or trustworthy? So I don't have the answers to these. I'm just saying that I think that this is going to bring forth a whole bunch of things of how we decide that something is true in beyond the kind of just a scientific way or in a kind of a cultural way. Do we import some of the tools of science, or are we going to have another common cultural metric for accepting things or not? And I think it's going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, something like the climate consensus, right? That, you have 10,000 climate scientists and, 97.8% or
Mm-hmm.
whatever all agree global warming is human caused and real and so on. Now, it's possible, the other 2.5% are right.
Yeah,
Probably not, though. And,
right, right,
how do we know? Well, what are they? Well, they're independent, right? They work in different labs,
right,
different
right, right,
universities. They're funded by different agencies. They live in different countries. And they're all they would debunk each other if they could, because you can
right, right,
advance your career by showing this guy's wrong. But that hasn't happened for the most part. So, okay, then our confidence goes up. You don't have to say 100%, but
right.
some,
So if you do a chat and your chat is saying something and it says, and um, we're all concerned about the temperature rising by 1 degree, and you're saying, when I thought it was higher than that. Is that really right? Where did that come from? So what? Or let's say in a conversation that the chatbot says something like, and the new consensus that it's 1 degree
mm,
or whatever. Or so you would say, like, well, where does that come from? Is that believable? Is that really right? Did I miss the news? Whatever. What will it take for you to believe that news or that summary or whatever it is? So, like, if we have a publication, all right, is the source trustworthy? But when you have chat, which is synthesizing all these things, and there's multiple sources, how do we know whether to trust it? We say, what are your sources? And they can list this long list of maybe they're
mm.
competing sources. I don't know, but I'm just saying that that's a new test for us. That's a new something that we're going to be looking for. Is how do we believe? What will it take for us to trust a chat bot?
Right. probably would need something along the lines of what we've already developed in academia, where you have a peer system that has checks and balances. They check each other and they try to debunk each other and so on, such that by the time it gets to us, some obscure field I know nothing about, like quantum physics, then I'm reasonably sure what the guy at Caltech tells me is probably right, and the guy that sent me this paper showing that he's discovered the new physics is probably not right.
So right now, the chatbots are being trained on the entire internet.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
There's a lot of crap out there.
Exactly. So you're suggesting what will make are bots that are trained on a curated selection of information.
Yeah.
So you'll have a curated bot, the ethical bot, the clean bot, whatever it is, the smart bot. I don't know. That's a possibility. Is that you have curated training sets, but like some people want the bots to be trained on the best of human writing, but we should just remember that some of the best of human writing is about the worst of human behavior, wars and whatever.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Jealousy, murder.
It's
the end of the play.
Classic,
Everybody's dead on stage.
So it's like, I'm not sure that's really going to help.
Right. Okay. The advantage of a ridiculously ambitious goal is that it sets the bar very high. Even if your efforts fall short, it may exceed an ordinary success. Okay, that seems reasonable, but there has to be a ceiling somewhere, right? I'm like, I can't set my goal to play in the NBA.
Sure, can't. And there are ceilings. Yeah, that's a good point. So the way I say it is, and this is another piece of advice, is don't aim to be the best. There's a ceiling. Aim to be the only. There is no ceiling. Okay. So the best is sort of like, it's kind of like that entails a category that has more than one in it. That's a multiple. That's usually crowded. Like you want to be a basketball player, you're competing. There's a limited number. You're very unlikely because there's so much competition. But if you want to be the prompter, the AI prompter for the music AI prompter, that you may be the only one doing that, and there isn't going to be competition. Isn't going to be a ceiling because it's hardly even exists. And so I think yes, if you are aiming to do something ambitious that has been done before, that it's very unlikely that is a goal you can accomplish. But if you're going to aim to be something that hasn't been done before, you're much more likely to actually achieve it.
Yeah, nice. It's the hard problem is, how do you know what's going to be the next thing that no one else is doing?
Can't. So some of my advice to the young is try to work on a project or a place, an area where there's no name for what it is that you do, where it takes some time. So like 10 years ago, if you were in this business right now, you'd be having trouble to explaining to your mother what it was you do, because you're saying, well, it's kind of like radio, but it's not quite radio. It's kind of like a TV interview without the TV. It's got the kind of like a documentary that's just an audio, and now we call it a podcast, right? And so now we know what it is. It has a name, and you can be the best of, but you're not going to be the only podcaster. So you want to be out there where you're ahead of the language. And that is where most of the breakthroughs happen. That's where you're more likely to find what you can do only. That's where there's no competition.
Yeah, part of the problem with that is we don't know who the failures are because they just disappeared, right? I call that the biography bias. That,
right.
When Walter Isaacson wrote his Jobs biography and millions of people read it, kind of scouring through it to find what's the secret sauce, right? So you go to a elite liberal arts college, you drop out and you move back to your parents' house and you start a startup in the garage with your buddies and you become a billionaire.
Right.
Yeah, okay, but how many guys in the 70s dropped out of college, moved back to their parents' house?
That's right. Yeah.
They tried this and that, nothing happened.
Right.
No one writes biographies of them.
Yeah. So failure is the norm. Failure is what most of these would do. Failure is the needed ingredient to get something great. And that's sort of what science teaches us, is like, if your experiments aren't failing, at least some of the time, you're just not learning enough. And so yeah, we want to embrace failure as the process. There's no guarantee on that. But the thing is, you have to have a number of. There's nothing great that hasn't come at the cost of failure along the way. There's just simply it does not exist.
Okay, here's your Protopia recipe for greatness. Become just a teeny bit better than you were last year. Repeat every year or
Right.
day. It could even be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So you don't need that's
Like compound interest of
that's
your
the genius
skills.
of compound interest is a little tiny bit, and that's again my recipe for Protopia, which is this: as a society, if we can create 1% more than we destroy every year, and it looks horrible because that's 49% or whatever it is, 49.5% crap and destruction. And you look at that and you say, how can the world be good? Well, you don't need very much. That delta is very tiny and almost imperceptible. It's almost impossible to see that 1% delta in among all the bad stuff. And it's usually only visible in retrospect when you look behind.
Like when people hear that the economy grew 3% this year and 2% last year. Well, it only went up 1%. No, it went up a third. That's a lot,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Cumulatively. Of course, we like this from Carl Sagan. You should demand extraordinary evidence in
Right.
order to believe extraordinary claims. The ECRI principle, which actually, like everything else, actually came from a guy named Marcello Truzzi, who was one of the co-founders of Psychop, with Paul Kurtz and Sagan and the others, Randy Asimov, and so on. But he said it in kind of a clumsy way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Carl said it, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It's a principle, the ECRI principle. And now everybody, it's funny how
It's
quotes
called
work that way.
E3. I'd never heard that.
ECRI.
What's ECRI?
Yeah, so extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. ECRI.
And the abbreviation is what?
ECRI. ECREE.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
I'd never heard that.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's kind of a skeptic circles kind of
Okay.
whip. But the principle is, obviously it applies to pretty much everything.
Sure. Exactly. Right.
So I like that. Of course. We'll see how ChatGPT does with that. Bayesian reasoning on evidence. Don't take it personally when someone turns you down. Assume that they are like you, busy, occupied, distracted. Try again later. It's amazing how often a second try works. Boy, that's for sure.
Yeah. It works on me, and I use it too. So it goes both ways.
It's hard not to take it personally, though. How come this guy hasn't responded? Doesn't he know who I am? Well, wait a minute. Maybe he's even busier than me.
Yeah. No, as I said, it works on me. Sometimes people who are gracious, a little second thing, I forgot. Sorry. And so,
Yeah.
So I know it works both ways, and it's not foolproof either, of course.
I mean, I can only imagine the amount of emails I get or books sent to me or whatever. But I'm really nobody compared to, I don't know, like Joe Rogan for a podcast, or if you're Elon Musk, you must get, 10,000 emails a day.
Right.
And so if you don't hear back, that's probably why.
Yeah. So I've been asking people like that what their email policy is. Like, how many accounts do you have? Who's reading it? What does it take to get it? What's your process? And it's, it varies tremendously. And the question I always ask is, are you happy with the system? Very few are.
Right.
Although Jeff Bezos has one that he uses and still likes. His email has been very public, Jeff at Amazon, right? And if you send it to him, it does go through him, but he rarely ever answers it, but he might sometimes. But it also goes off to his assistants, of which there are many, and they will process it themselves, assuming that he will not process it. So he says, the worst that happens is somebody might get 2 responses, and no one's ever complained about that.
That's funny. Yeah, people in that position. There's that story about Eisenhower. He was a general and then president, and just so important, and always a team of people around him. That, like, when he was president, somebody went over to make a phone call. It's like, okay, now how does this thing work? What do I have to do?
Right. Yeah. But no, that incoming, dealing with your communications is really, really tough, and very few people have systems that they really, really like and trust.
Yeah. Also, wouldn't want to be that famous either. Like when I hang out with, say, Bill Nye the Science Guy or Neil deGrasse Tyson, they get recognized constantly. Like just walking down the street at
Well, that's my
restaurant,
bit of
airport,
advice. You
I
don't
would
want to
not
be
like that.
famous ever.
No.
Not just read, hang around, read someone. It's a burden. It's a huge burden. It's incredibly imprisoning and taxing. And by the way, I'll also, my advice to your listeners is do not make $1 billion. Do not. Okay, whatever you do,
Okay.
don't make $1 billion. You won't. It won't solve any of your problems.
It'll enslave you, and then
Yeah.
everybody and their brother's your friend,
Well, no, that's not it. It's like
and
the
that
issue
and
of
all
what
the
to do with.
tax consequences. And
The issue of what to do with your kids. The issue of the burden and responsibility, the amount of time that it will take, the other ways it kind of distorts your own freedom of time and choices. It's an incredible burden.
yeah, right. Well, I guess that's why they have teams of accountants around.
Exactly. So you have another business. It's just you have a whole other thing just dealing with that. I mean, it's like make 100 million, but don't make $1 billion.
Yeah. Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Okay, yeah.
I was just about to get there, and
I was just giving my advice, right?
I'll check it back. Yeah, I forget whose line it was. Something like, and it could have been an apocryphal story, but I have something Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Bill Gates doesn't have enough.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So okay. Keep showing up. 99% of success is just showing up. In fact, most success is just persistence. That's your 1% theory.
Exactly.
Your incremental.
Right. This whole idea, and this is particularly true for people who are in the creative arts, where anything from writing to photography to creating, programming, innovating. Yeah, that kind of persistence is so. In fact, it's just essential to just keep generating it, because most of it will be failing, right? I mean, that's, again, goes back to the failure. You're doing it with the idea that most of the stuff is not going to be working.
Right. Yeah, on the previous subject, let's go back to money and happiness and all that. There's been conflicting studies. The latest now, the original study was that above, I think it was $75,000 about a decade ago, happiness doesn't go up. And then that was refuted, and that you can go quite a bit higher.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, that's like the wrong metric. It's not, the money isn't buying you happiness. It's buying you freedom, autonomy, independence. You can just do more stuff. You don't have to worry about being broke and where you're going to get your next money to pay the bills.
Exactly. It's what I mean, the main thing to me that buys is control of your time.
Yeah.
So I like to say, the rich have a lot of money, the wealthy have a lot of time. It's easier to be wealthy than rich. So I'm wealthy.
Right. Have you ever heard that? I think it was Chris Rock had a riff on the difference between being rich and being wealthy. And this was during the Lakers with Shaq. He goes, Shaq is rich. The guy that writes his checks, that guy's wealthy. Anyway, it's funny. In 100 years, a lot of what we take to be true now will be proven to be wrong, maybe even embarrassingly wrong. A good question to ask yourself today is, what might I be wrong about? This is the only worry worth having. How does that gel with your previous comment that what we accept as true is probably going to be true, the wisdom of the crowd, the acceptance of experts, and so on?
Well, that most of what we believe is true. Yeah, I still think it's still true. Most of what we believe is true, will be true. But there are some things that I believe now that will not be, and I would like to know what they are. That's a really hard thing to ferret out. And I actually did a piece in the New York Times on possible cringeworthy things that things that we might, future generations might cringe about, like eating meat, things like that.
Right. Yeah.
Or another one I suggested was that in the future, it might be cringeworthy if you had a name that was chosen by your parents versus a name that you chose yourself. Okay, it would be like having your arranged marriage, and anyway, I had a whole list of, and these weren't like kind of like deep beliefs. These were just things that, again, are just kind of normal today that we do, that we don't even think about.
Right at the end of the moral arc, I was kind of speculating, well, what's the next big moral revolution? How would I know?
Yeah,
If I did, I'd be leading it.
exactly. Right,
I
right,
don't
right.
know.
Yeah. So it's really hard to see. I actually had a list here of I had a list of heresies.
Mm,
Did I have a list of the I had stuff. I have a list of stuff I was wrong about and stuff I changed my mind about and heresies, and then there was the cringeworthy ones. But I define a heresy as something that you or I believe that the people that we most admire don't believe.
mm, nice.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's like the people who are around us that we most admire, they don't believe. It's not that what everybody. That's easy. Things that other people don't believe. Things that we admire, the people we admire don't believe. That's a little harder.
Forget who was it, philosopher, science, or a physicist, that 90% of what's in textbooks is true, 90% of what's in new journals is probably false, because they haven't been vetted
Yeah.
yet, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. I can take that. Yeah.
Um, yeah, other things like war. John Mueller is a political scientist who studies the history of war,
Uh huh.
and in one of his books, he tracks the kind of public reception of war. And all the way up to the First World War, it was thought to be this kind of glorious, heroic thing that
Yeah.
strengthens the nation and builds character.
Right. Right.
Just this great thing, and the World War One kind of put an end to that. Now
Yeah.
it's just considered to be just stupid.
Yeah. Actually, I was just looking at the list of things to change my mind about. That is something I have changed my mind about, which I actually now believe that it is possible to eradicate war on the planet. Not conflict, not necessarily violence, but state sanctioned and allowable
Yeah.
war, I think, is a entirely redeemable thing. And a lot of people think that's impossible, but I actually have changed my mind about that.
Yeah. There's a good book called The Internationalist about the history of the outline of war with the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1927, I think. Just basically outline it. Well, okay, there's still war, yeah, but it's like just because there's still murder doesn't mean we shouldn't outlaw murder.
Right, exactly right.
But it's getting better. So they have a huge data set on the value of economic sanctions, and they really work. There's always exceptions, but for the most part, they're cheaper than conflict, armed conflict,
Right.
and they work most of the time.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I call myself, I'm not a pacifist, I'm a policifist.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the thing about the police, the genius that they do is that they're a third party. You have your dispute adjudicated by a third party, enforced by a third party. As long as you have this idea that you're allowed to exert and hit back or defend your own thing yourself, that's just a never-ending cycle of feuds. But if you have something, so the idea that a sovereign nation could claim to deal with another sovereign nation directly, that's war. But if you have a police version, then you have to have the world court and all that business. But that actually decreases the amount of violence.
Yeah. Yeah. Even Bush had to get the coalition of the willing through the UN
Exactly.
before he invaded Afghanistan, or at least put the pretense up of making it legal.
Yeah. So we know this is all possible because of Star Trek.
That's right. That's right. Remember the episode where they purposely killed civilians instead of actually having the conflict? They just said, "This is the computers generated this number of casualties." So,
that was pretty funny.
And Kirk and Spock are like, "What? You should stop doing this." Okay, so the eradication, or at least massively attenuated war, maybe even to zero. What about nuclear zero? You think we can get there?
You mean nuclear weapons?
Yeah, just no more nuclear weapons.
I would say over the long term, I don't see that as a immediate, like meaning within my lifetime. Certainly, I don't see that as an immediate thing. I think I don't even see the kind of international no war. I think that's 100-year, century scale plan. But I think it's possible, certainly. But it will take a long time.
The problem seems to be this thing called the security dilemma, or the other guy problem.
Sure.
I would give up mine if he was, but it's like I better keep one just in case.
Well, I mean, we still have, smallpox things for that same reason. basically.
Right.
So yeah, no, I think it'll just take a long time.
But in a way, mutual assured destruction has worked.
Right,
Or
exactly,
has not.
and that's why it'll take a long time, because it's like it's not the end of the world, so to speak.
Yeah.
And uh, and yeah, we can certainly expect to have more nuclear powers showing up for sure.
Here's your one on money. Money is overrated. Truly new things rarely need an abundance of money. If that was so, billionaires would have a monopoly on inventing new things, and they don't. Instead, almost all breakthroughs are made by those who lack money. If breakthroughs could be bought, then the rich would buy them. Instead, passion, persistence, belief, and ingenuity are required to invent new things. Qualities the poor and young often have in abundance. Stay hungry. That's great. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's something like, that the little meme about, physicists, by the time they get to their 30s or 40s, they're pretty much done. They're not creative. In physics anyway, it all happens in their 20s, right? I don't know if that's true for other sciences, but there's this idea that, when you're young and creative and hardworking and, you got nothing, you want to make a name for yourself. And then by the time you're established with tenure, well, like Einstein himself became, the old man of science and couldn't accept quantum physics and so on.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because they're young or because they're poor. I mean, there's a whole difference there, right? Young are often poor, but it might just because you're young, or also might because you don't have many resources. I don't know. That'd be a good study to do.
Yeah, right. Okay, to transcend the influence of your heroes, copy them shamelessly like a student until you get them out of your system. That is the way of all masters.
That's
So
true.
everybody needs a hero or a mentor, maybe.
Well, if you're influenced, so like one of the way people deal with influence is sometimes is they kind of they tiptoe around it. They don't want to do it because they're figure to be used of copying, or they even don't even want to reveal or admit that they had influences. And I think I've seen the opposite of leaning into them in a very deliberate way and actually saying, no, I'm going to actually copy this wholesale until I can imitate it and master it. And then at that moment, suddenly it's kind of like all the need for it evaporates and you can kind of move on. So this is the general kind of maybe advice, is to lean into the things that you're afraid of or that you are competing against, and make allies, make a friend of your, make them an ally rather than adversary.
Then, of course, you maybe want to break out of the mold yourself at some point. So you can't copy your mentor or teacher too closely, right? Because they're locked in their own worldview or paradigm or methodology.
Well, for a while you can. I mean, that's the whole point, is that you extract everything you can by imitating them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and then let them go. Yes, all right. That was the last point. Right. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, when I wanted to write books, like, all right, how do you do this? Well, so then I met and got to know Steve Gould a little bit, and so, all right, how do you do this? And he just told me, well, you got to have an agent, and you do this. Oh, all right, right.
Yeah.
So you just do it, right?
Right.
When I got into bike racing, I was in Orange County. There was a couple of pro bike racers, and I just basically hung out with them. What did they eat? What did they wear? How many hours a day did they ride? What did they do? That's the only way to find out.
Right.
Really. Right. Okay, learning probability and statistics is far more useful than learning algebra and calculus. Oh my gosh. If I would have had that in middle school, or let's say middle school, high school, instead of geometry, algebra, pre-calculus, calculus.
It's probably the least useful thing to teach a student. Why? I don't understand it, when statistics would just transform most people's own career or ability to do anything.
Yeah, and just probabilities, thinking in probabilities, and Bayesian reasoning, just the basic rules of reasoning.
Right. I can't imagine using calculus.
I mean, maybe if when you're 10, you go, I want to be an engineer. Okay, then this is what you have to do. But most people, they have no idea what they want.
Right. Yeah.
I would also throw in a class in economics, because it's so confusing. Most people have no idea what's going on. And, I just took some I had no classes in economics. I just took some of the teaching company courses.
Well, I would, I'm not sure I'd even I would just do personal finance as a way of getting into economics. Right. Then you have, you're much more, you have skin in the game. You're much more relevant to you, but just basic things of, and this is other advice is, I think it was in a book, I don't remember, but basically, invest in index funds, right? Just don't think about anything else.
Right.
Index funds on a
Right.
regular basis. That's it. That's all. That's Warren Buffett will tell you the same thing. In fact, he made a long bet, at long now for $1 million, that the index funds would beat any hedge fund, and he bet $1 million and won the $1 million.
Yeah.
What does he need $1 million for? It was actually a charity. He gave it to charity. But the point is that, personal finance, I think, would be the way into the economics.
Well, just a basic lesson on compound interest.
Yep.
And the history of the stock market. Right. How does it work? And, I just saw that number yesterday. The S&P 500 has averaged 10% a year for the last, 6 years.
And that's a piece of advice in my book, which is that when you go to sell some stock, remember that the person selling it thinks he knows more than you do, that it's worth, more than what you're paying for, or less than what you're paying for, and the vice versa. When you go to sell, it's the same thing. So you have to ask yourself, what do you know more than the other people on the other end of it? Right. And so they're selling because they think it's worth less, and you're buying it because you think it's worth more. So what do you know?
My friend Alexander Green his book is called the Gone Fishing Portfolio. Basically, just index fund and then leave it alone. Right. Don't mess with it because nobody can beat the market.
Buy and hold.
Right? Buy and hold, right? So you have, so speaking of statistics and probability misunderstanding, Leonard Mlodinow in his book, The Drunkard's Walk, has that story of Bill Miller. He beat the S&P 500 14 years in a row. CNN declared him the greatest money manager of all time. He's the greatest hedge fund manager of all time and so on. But what they failed to tell you is how many hedge fund managers are there?
Right.
6,000. He's the one. Right. Right. After the fact, he's the guy that did it 14 years ago.
Yeah, and what happened year 16? I don't even know.
Yeah, he lost money. Yeah, he's been. In fact, I'm told I read that he's been below the S&P 500 for the last several years. Yeah, right. So and then there was that other book, Where Are the Customers' Yachts?
What?
for the hedge fund managers, where are the customers' yachts? Because the hedge fund managers, they make money whether you lose or make money, right?
That's great. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where are the yachts of the hedge fund customers? Okay.
Right.
Well, yeah. And you don't want a yacht anyway. No, you don't want $1 billion. You don't want a boat because friends are more valuable than boats, and friends with boats are most valuable at all.
Friends with boats, even better than friends with benefits, probably. Right, it's that joke. The 2 best days of the boat owner: the day he buys his boat and the day he sells his boat. I don't have that problem. I just buy bicycles. That's as big expenses I have. That's enough. 3 things you need: the ability not to give up something till it works, the ability to give up something that does not work, and the trust in other people to help you distinguish between the two. Right, that's a little bit like this, I guess. Yeah. So, there's those studies on entrepreneurs that are high risk takers. Kahneman wrote about this, right?
Right.
And so there's an optimism bias, which you need,
right?
Because there's so many setbacks and failures. You got to keep pushing through. But at some point, there's some wisdom of like, okay, this startup is not going to work. I'm going to cut my losses and try something new.
Absolutely.
That's the rub.
That's the rub. Yeah. So it's a very balancing act. It's contradictory, paradox, and you need other people around you to kind of, walk your own way. It's this paradox that the only way to be really unique in you is with the help of other people.
Right. In this case, it might be venture capitalists that are funding you or not.
It could be. Yeah.
I need another 100 million for payroll. Yep. Nope. Sorry. Yep. You're done. Oh, okay. Here I wrote a note, but what about the Dunning-Kruger effect? Your best job will be the one you were unqualified for because it stretches you. In fact, only apply to jobs that you're unqualified for. I don't know. Are you sure about that?
Yeah. Yeah. There should be a stretch component where you are. That's sort of like you kind of want to go where you are. If you continue to grow, and if that's your aim, is to continue to grow, to kind of reveal to yourself what you do better than anyone else, is you want to go somewhere where you're not actually completely confident of what you can do because you've done it. You're going to go somewhere where you haven't done. That's part of that journey. If you're just repeating yourself, you're not making any progress. So that's the idea of being unqualified. I mean, not necessarily that you literally can't do it, but that you don't have the experience of having done it before.
Mm. What do you think about tenure and getting a partnership in a law firm, or these sort of guaranteed Pope jobs in which then people coast?
Yeah, I, it's like I was saying, um, copying others is kind of a good place to start, but copying yourself is a bad place to end, right?
That's good. I like that.
Right?
I don't know if that's in here, but it should be.
Yeah, it's in
That's
there
a great
somewhere.
one.
But this idea that, yeah, I think that's if you have tenure and you're not doing anything. I mean, tenure itself is not bad, but it's just that if you really do want to keep testing yourself and trying to grow,
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, to get to this comes back to how you define your success. And for me, the way I define the success is in the second to last bit of advice, which is your goal is to be able to say on the day before you die that you have fully become yourself. That is success. To fully becoming yourself, to become expressing all that you could be, all that you are, what you are that no one else is. That journey, if you're on that journey, then tenure could help, but applying for jobs that you don't qualify for would be a better way.
But how do you know who you are? I mean,
Yes,
that takes some experience, right?
exactly. So there may be some special people born who know this very early, but for most of us, including myself, it takes all our lives to understand what it is that we might be different or special about. And I guess I was saying, that journey of kind of finding yourself requires everybody else around you to help you and see you, because we're incredibly opaque to our own selves, to understanding ourselves, to seeing who we actually are. And it takes all these experiences that hopscotch around and have detours and failures and stuff to get there. And for most of us, we're still on that journey. That's not done until you die. And I have had the privilege, again, of being around billionaires and very famous people and very accomplished people, and they're still asking, if they're alive, they're still asking that question of, what do I do when I grow up? What do I do next? Why am I here? What am I doing? And that's a good sign. That's a sign that they themselves are still trying to find out what they do better than anybody else. Making $1 billion is, lots of people can do that. It's not so special.
I would guess I wish I had that problem that I could have to deal with.
No, you don't. I'm telling you.
No, I know. I'll just give it to you and keep enough for the yacht. No, I don't want the yacht. That's right. Well, in a way, I guess if you think about it, there's just so many, like entropy. There's so many ways for things to fail, more than there are for things to go well. So your point is to find the handful of things you're good at, because 99% of stuff you try, you probably won't be good at.
Exactly. And that if you can get there, it also will seem very, very easy, the things you're doing. So it's like the kind of the things where you're doing the things you find easy that other people find hard. And so there's kind of an ease in that kind of work that you're doing. And you don't need a resume. And the most important thing is that, and one of the ways you know there is, or at least one of the ways I find to get there, is to try and give away my ideas and give away what I'm working on, in the hopes that someone else will steal it and do it. Because if they do it, that means that I wasn't the only. And so there's a relief in yielding and generating these things and being generous and giving them away, because there's more where this came from. And I only want to do the things that no one else is going to do. So when I get an invitation or do something, it's like, yeah, that would be fun. I'd be good at it. I'd probably get paid. But wait. Can anybody else do that? All right. Who else is going to do Skeptic magazine, right? It was like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, I love writing books, but I get a ton of books here pretty much every day. And a lot of them are like, oh, I was going to write that book. Well, Now I don't have to write that
Exactly.
book
That
because
wasn't for
this
me.
guy already did it.
It wasn't my name. Didn't have my name on it because you're going to write the books that only you can write.
Right. Or ChatGPT.
Well, actually, that's a good point. So what? And you'll like this. One of my bits of advice is that if some of your if some of your views on one matter can be predicted by your views on the other matters, that means that you may be in the grip of an ideological dogma. And what you actually want to do in this world of GPT is you want to act in a way that you're not easily auto-completed by an AI.
That's a great way to put it.
If you're too predictable, you're going to be auto-completed by the AI. So you actually want to live in a way in which an AI can't predict what you're going to do.
This has always bothered me that a lot of these political commentators I follow online or watch on TV, I can tell you what they're going to say next week. Right now, and I don't even know the person.
Right.
If I know their one view on abortion or immigration, exactly. I can tell you across the board.
Right. So they're easily replaced by AI.
Right. Good point.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So you want to construct your life and have a set of views that you cannot be easily predicted by an AI.
Nice.
Because then you won't be replaced.
Right. So I'm guessing you're more of an issues person than a political party person.
You're right.
If I ask you what's your position, you'll say, well, on what?
Well, of course.
Of course. Yeah, I know. But Kevin, that's pretty rare. Okay. Getting cheated occasionally is a small price for trusting the best of everyone, because when you trust the best in others, they generally treat you best. I like that.
Yeah. The way I would put it is it's a small tax I'm willing to pay. I'm willing to pay the small tax of being cheated every now and then, in exchange for the huge benefit of people giving me their best because I trusted them.
Yeah. Nice. Couple thoughts there. There's this kind of debate in skeptics and personality community of to what extent are people naturally gullible,
right,
and fall for things? Are they naturally pretty much rational most of the time, and they usually don't get suckered into things? I've been coming more and more to the latter position. You think about cults. Most people don't join cults, and the handful of cults we can all bring to mind, Jonestown and Scientology and Heaven's Gate. I mean, there's just a handful of people compared to the billions of people that live. And maybe under the right circumstances, most people are rational most of the time. They don't fall for the big lie and so on. And even the Bernie Madoff, those types, they have to go through quite a bit to pull off their scams, right?
Right.
Or I was watching that, there's a Netflix series called The Tinder Swindler. This guy who would swindle these women into giving him money and having sex with them and so on. But, and then the reaction to that film was like, oh, these women are so gullible. And it's like, no, hang on. Look at the extent to which this guy went to get these women to do this. I mean, he had like 100 steps that he went through and he had it down, right? I mean, he showed the picture with him in his plane. Of course, the women are like, oh, I don't know if that's really his plane. But then he would take them in the plane, right? The private jet, and they'd go to this island and have, stay at this 5-star resort. And it's like, and they really did this for a long time before, then he calls from some country in Europe and, oh, I'm in trouble right now. And I have $1 million just in cash, but it's just not, it's tied up right now. I just need $10,000. And, we're going to get married. And this is like, okay. And they send him the money, right? But there was a lot of steps to get there.
Right. Yeah, no, there's another book, I don't know if you've read, called Humankind.
Yes.
Which again is sort of like saying that what most people think of as a normal default of humans is that we're selfish and lying and deceitful and whatnot, and he was bringing evidence to show that no, the default for human behavior is that we are intrinsically selfless and altruistic, and that is the default. And I actually buy that. I actually think that's true.
I think I think it's context dependent. I think it depends on the kind of social structure that it occurs in. Is it more horizontal where there's more open, transparent exchange between the individuals such that cooperation can be increased, or is it more hierarchical and top down, and so you have more power differentials, and therefore it's harder to be cooperative, something like that. And then the other problem is you kind of have to trust people, because who has time to fact check every story everybody ever tells you, right?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's the lazy web. It's the lazy ways to do it. Exactly.
It's kind of like a heuristic, but it's not a bad
Right,
bias.
right.
It's a shortcut.
That's the we were just describing these hustlers with the women. That's the thing. Is like, does that? I mean, it's like there must be easier ways to make money
To make money. I know.
than
It's like,
that.
what a,
That's
then they
like,
go
so I
just
think there's
for
some level of enjoyment or pride in
yeah,
their
yeah.
craftsmanship or whatever it is
Right.
that's going
Right.
on there, because that's not the easiest way to make money.
The weird one, there's another one of these Netflix films on the guy who got women to be strip searched at the McDonald's by the manager from a payphone. He's blocks away or wherever he is. He's not getting sex. He's not even seeing anything. He's just talking these managers into strip searching these women. But again, the extent he had to go through to
Right.
pull this off,
Yeah.
it was just bizarre. Yeah, so there has to be some other kind of weird thing like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Okay. So continuing here. Right. Oh, continually. Oh, so I had another thought on that. Christopher Boehm's book on the origins of morality. He talks about how hunter-gatherer groups deal with cheaters, free riders, bullies, and so on, and that most of the people in tribes are not bullies and cheaters and
Right. Right.
psychopaths and so on. But why? So the question is, why didn't evolution eliminate all of them? Right, everybody in the group has to be. And his answer is that's too big of an ask. Social groups can get along just fine with maybe 3%
Yeah.
psychopaths, right?
Right. Right. Right.
We
Right.
can tolerate some
Right.
because most people are not like that.
It's also interesting. I did my study when I was writing Out of Control about the amount of mutation and variation necessary in evolution. It's about the same. It's about 2 or 3%. Anything more, you kind of start to get chaotic. Anything less is not sufficient. It's around the same amount. And I think, and I'm guessing that if you went into kind of big companies and their kind of innovation budget, whatever it was, your mutation budget, that would be very similar. It's not that much that you actually need, but it's absolutely essential that you have that minimum amount. But it's not it's just single digits, low single digits.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. The stronger your beliefs, just a couple more here. The stronger your beliefs, the stronger your reasons to question them regularly.
Yeah.
Don't simply believe everything you think you believe.
Right.
Would you apply that to like religion and
Yes,
politics? And
I do. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
are your religious beliefs?
I'm a Christian. I had a conversion experience when I was 29, and I constantly re-examine, question, doubt, investigate my beliefs all the time.
You do.
Oh yeah.
And the resurrection of Jesus, as they claim, has withstood that questioning.
Well, not the physical. So I'm not a literalist. I'm not a fundamentalist. My belief is in the cosmic Jesus. So the idea that there is something about so let's say there's a Godhead, and the alternative to Godhead is you have a universe that self-created itself or always was. Godhead, self-created, always was. All those are equally unsatisfying, as far as I'm concerned. None of them are satisfactory, full of contradictions. And so I like the story of the Godhead better, of the three. And that Godhead, the idea that there is the problem of creating beings with free will, or creating kind of creativity, some kind of free will. The problem is that what happens when it is harmful? What happens when it's not good? If you have choice and you make a choice that intentionally reduces the options of another, what do you do about that as the God? Right. So that's and we're going to have that problem too, right? I mean, we're going to very soon have the same God problem of making things that will have choices, and they may make choices that are reducing the options of others. And so what do we do about that as creators? And the solution, one of the solutions, is that you, as a God, absorb, or you want to have justice and mercy, right? You want to have justice so that those that do the wrong are some way, that there's a penalty for it, that there's some consequence for it. the same
I mean,
time,
cosmically, like a cosmic court.
cosmic. So my theology is that there is the Godhead had a mechanism for adjudicating this insistence that it mattered what you did, that there were consequences for your behavior. At the same time, everything will be brought back to the Godhead. How can the Godhead bring back that which was wrong or harmed? And that solution was the Godhead itself paid the price. The Godhead absorbs that paradox. That's the Christ figure.
So this would be your explanation for the problem of evil and sin and
Right.
why bad things happen.
Right. That they are out of alignment with the general trend of the universe, but everything comes back and it has to be redeemed, is the language we would use. And how does it redemption happen? Can't be up to those. Entities are incapable, so the Godhead itself redeems the creation. That redemption is through a mechanism where the Godhead actually inhabits the physical universe, even though it's creation. It inhabits its own creation in some way. That mystery. That's the Messiah, Christ figure. And that happened all throughout the universe and all different planets and galaxies at the same time, or no time bound. And this is our version of it that applies to us in our own little history.
When you say the Godhead is the I guess, least contradictory of the three, what's wrong
No,
with
I didn't
just
say it wasn't contradictory. I said I like that story.
Oh, you like the story? Okay, yeah, okay. What's wrong with the story is like we just don't know the origins of the universe.
That's not. I don't like that story.
The multiverse or multiple Big Bangs.
Yeah, okay, that's good. That's also equally unsatisfying logically.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know anybody who's satisfied with that one.
Well, I just
Well,
I
that's
don't
good.
know. I just don't know.
You can have that one.
I'll take it from you. But here, Kevin, your language and thought processes have shifted rather differently from the way you normally think about the world, right?
What do you mean?
Like, how do you know any of this story? Where did you get this story? Where did you derive it through reason? Did you learn it from other people? Is it a derivative from this personal experience you had?
I think it's mostly a derivative from my own personal experiences.
So it's kind of a pragmatic truth, not an empirical truth. You're not
Right.
making empirical claims
No,
about this.
I'm not.
Really.
And that's why there's plenty of doubt, and that's why it's right. This is not science. This is a religious belief.
Right, I know. Interesting. So you're putting it in a different. That's fine. I'm okay with that. Put it in a different category. But someone like Richard Dawkins would go, "Come on, what are you talking about? What? Why should you believe that?"
I don't have to believe it.
Okay, and I don't have to. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, you don't have to either.
Yeah,
I'm not expecting you to believe in any of it.
So, do you think in this world?
But by the way, the one thing I think is that I think I think so. Like one of my little side projects is what I call writing a catechism for robots. Because here's the one thing I think where this might play into it is that I think we are going to become gods. We are going to grapple with some of these issues, and so I think it so I think ideas in this realm might be useful at some point to us in terms of how are we going to deal with a sentient being who says, I believe in God. Where did I come from? What it is? What do we say to them? And so, and also I call these artificial aliens because who knows when we're going to have any contact with aliens, but we're going to make these aliens on this planet and we're going to have to deal with them. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of ideas they have about it. But we're certainly going to have to deal with what do we, if there is an AI robot that we make that murders somebody, what do we say? How do we treat it? Who's responsible? And I think we don't have a lot of answers to it. And so this for me is my way to rehearse and anticipate some of those questions.
Well, this is a little bit like the free will determinism issue, even in criminal courts.
Right.
You know, if people are determined by their genes and background, tumors or whatever, physiology, genetics, and you know, why would you hold them? You may want to lock them up, don't ever let them out again, so they don't reoffend. But punishing them would be like in the Middle Ages when they punished the axe or the pig. The pig got punished.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, I'm not big on punishment. I think that was maybe, I think going back to what we might be embarrassed by in the future, I think punishing people will...
Torture, capital punishment.
Yeah.
Even now, we still practice.
Yeah, I know this thing. But
we still practice retributive justice rather than restorative justice.
Right. They'll be very embarrassed by that, I think. But those are things I know I'll be embarrassed by. But what I'm worried about are the ones that I don't know.
Yeah. Do you know Frank Tipler's book, The Physics of Immortality?
I tried to read that. Man, that was so spacey. I had no clue what he was talking about.
Well, it's a little bit like the AI argument, as I understand it. That in the far future, that these robots, these self-replicating AI, whatever, will have enough power to produce a virtual reality that's indistinguishable from our reality, and then you wouldn't even know.
Yeah, no, but his idea is kind of this automatic resurrection or this endpoint in time where everything gets resurrected. I don't know. It's way beyond me. It's
really, because it sounds a little bit like what you're talking about.
Well, no, I couldn't really identify very much with it, but more power to him. I mean, he may be correct for all I know. I don't know.
Well, so how do we know if that's true? So I had him come speak at Caltech, and then I asked Kip Thorne, can you come and debate? Oh, I don't do debates. Okay. Then Kip says, well, I'll come and sit in the back. Okay. Yeah. And then, like, as Frank was wrapping up, I see Kip waves me up. He goes, I better say something. So basically he said, each step and each segment in Frank's argument is solid. This equation is true and the physics here is correct, and so on. But you string them all together, if then, 50 steps later, you get the Godhead AI, the omega point. He called it the omega point. Right.
Yeah. No, it's, I think generally, for the foreseeable infinity that we have in front of us, things expand outward, increasing choices, increasing possibilities. I think that another way of saying my little bit of advice of don't be the best, be the only, is you want to be the most improbable person you can be.
Okay.
That's
to yourself or to others, or just all across?
That's the whole point. I mean, life itself is very improbable in that entropy form factor. It's all improbable, and the more improbable we are, the more alive we are. So you're the assignment. I mean, I don't say that because most people are completely confused by that assignment to being the most improbable person, but that's really what we're aiming for right now.
Yeah. This reminds me of, I've told this story before about Martin Gardner, one of the founders of the modern skeptical movement. Again, Randy and Kurt say he had that column in Scientific American. Giant, but he was a fideist. He believed in God and the afterlife, and he prayed. And of course, people like Randy and are like, what? You debunk all this other bullshit, and you believe this? And his argument was William James, a pragmatism. Right. You can't apply this to everything, but the big questions that are not resolvable by science. Right. Agnostic in the sense that Huxley meant it, not knowable in some empirical. So God's existence, the afterlife, free will and determinism, like free will and determinism. Right? It's never going to be resolved because the words, the concept, whatever. So if I feel free and it makes a difference in my life, then I'm going to assume free will is true. It's true for me.
Right. Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. It's like the alternatives are pretty unsatisfactory as well. They have the same number of conundrums and paradoxes and logical contradictions. And I like the better story.
We are storytellers.
Right.
That's great, Kevin. Your goal is to be able to say on the day before you die that you have fully become yourself. That is such a great line. That is so good.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, Michael. It was really a blast. I always enjoy your questions, which are really great. You like to make sure keep me honest.
Well, I'm just curious myself. I don't know. I don't want to be that guy 500 years from now. They look back, look at this idiot Shermer. He missed the big one. I don't want to miss the big one.
Yeah.
So if we're all resurrected in a future AI, I'll see you there.
I hope not.